and I'm handing it over to Mark.
Thank you, Max. Good morning, everyone. My name is Mark Myers. I'm city manager in Bath, and I'm also the chair of the Mid-Coast Council of Governments Board. And I want to welcome you this morning to Owl's Head Transportation Museum, which I've been told I'll be able to play with Legos and ride on a little airplane at some point today. Thank you all for taking the time, for making the time to be able to come together. We have a great program today. Thank you for those on Zoom who weren't able to come in person and had the patience of us working through pastries, coffee, and name tags to hold things up. So sometimes you go to a concert and the band starts out with, exciting music to get you started with the day. We're starting a little more mellow today. So we are starting with our business meeting. We have a little bit of business to attend to with a budget matter. And for that, I'm going to turn it over to Matthew Eddy.
Thank you, Mark. And this is pretty dry stuff. That's why we put it first. If you remember, in the spring, the federal budget was a little bit up in the air, and where our resources were coming from and how they were going to come was a bit of a question for us. However, we were able to navigate through that stream, and several budget items, revenue items that we knew were coming in, but we didn't have contracts for, by the time we approved the budget in the General Assembly, actually came to fruition. And so we needed to adjust our budget to bring on an additional person and to handle work in Brownfields program, the Northern Border program, the coastal program. Where's Joe? I think, which I didn't budget for this year, and then found out that we were getting, and a number of other resources, including additional revenues for communities that have been signing up for services and doing things like comprehensive planning in Lincolnville and in Montville and a number of other communities. So we found ourselves very busy and needed to go through a budget change, and that's what we're asking you to do today. In essence, in this sheet here, in bold, you will find both increases in revenues and expenses. On the expense side, we're adding a staff person. Where's Claire? Okay. We'll introduce Claire. We're bringing her on, brought her on as a contractor, but we'd like to transition that over to a staff person. We've had to increase our costs, therefore, in our health expenses and in our taxes. We've put a good deal of our additional expense into contractors, and we're not going to add, beyond Claire, we're not going to add any other staff people. We're going to contract this through with a really, being concerned about what the federal budget is and what's happening, keeping our ability to be flexible and to be able to scale down with contractors first over the next year and a half. But our contract as a result of some of the land use changes that we have seen, we also recognize the need to potentially take on somebody to help us with some of the land use work and providing communities with additional information with House Bill 1829, which is sort of an extension of 2003, and all the things that are in that bill that we're still waiting for the rulemaking process to decide how we're best able to provide you with recommendations, and then the actions that you may very well have to take in your zoning ordinances to make changes. So in terms of revenues, the Brownfield program, Northern Border, additional community services, in essence, the budget that we're asking you to amend is a budget where revenues remain over expenses, a new budget expense line of $1.2 million, 1.249919 is our new budget, and revenues slightly more than that at $1,262,000. So the bottom line is, it's money that we thought was coming in. At the time that we approved the budget, we were still being conservative based on the patterns that were going on with the federal government. We've made that change. We're ready to move on, and we're asking you folks to approve this budget change today. Jane, was the so moved? Reed? Have a second? Okay. Second over here. All those in favor? Any questions before we do that? Any questions? I don't want to be too excited about getting the budget approved, but I really am. Jay? Sally, go ahead.
I don't have any questions. I'm just here to say that I have a proxy for our town manager, so there'd be 2 votes from Brunswick and a yay. Can you hear me?
Ken,
I can hear you.
I'm not sure if they can hear me.
put it in the chat, maybe?
Yeah, I did. I did put it in the chat earlier just to them that in case, because I do have to jump off.
Well, hold on.
Now can you hear us?
Can you hear us, Matt?
Yes, can you hear us?
Yeah.
Yeah, we can hear
Now
you
we
fine.
can. We can.
Okay, okay.
Okay.
It's just
Yes.
it's just Matt they can't hear. Don't worry, everyone. We'll be fine for the rest of the day.
Okay. But you can hear us now.
We can.
Okay, so I just wanted to say that I am here on behalf of myself and our town manager and voting on her proxy 2 yays. So I just want to make sure that was understood.
All right. Thank you, Sally. So we can take a vote. All in favor?
Yay.
I think we have a quorum out there. We'll count it up later. We're ready to move on. And I'll go ahead. So I have the privilege of introducing Mike Duguay, the Commissioner of the Department of Economic and Community Development. Mike scared me the other day on an email exchange when he reminded me that I was his boss, his first boss, which really got me to feeling extremely old and also very contemplative. And Mike is the classic community development professional that I love to have my staff think about and espouse to be. And just to give you a grounding, when Mike was working at GPCOG, he took on the joint purchasing program. And he actually made it into the business that it is today. He expanded it. He created it so that it paid for his position, which was back then in GPCOG, not unlike any other time in history. We were struggling with a budget and trying to figure out who we could keep and who we couldn't. And Mike paid for himself. He managed to create a really good business program that you as communities use today if you opt into the GPCOG's joint purchasing program. So like Mike, we both started in regional planning. I want to point that out all to my staffers, that regional planning is a great place to begin your career as a planner, community development professional, economic development professional. He went on to work in the Department of Community Development in a number of different roles, whether it's a CDBG program, the Business Assistance Program, or all the others. I'm not sure I know them all, Mike, as time went on. He then went on and worked in the private sector, as I did, and a number of others have, for a number of years, looking to extend natural gas into your communities. Did that for 10 years or so. Yeah, okay. And then he went to Thomas College, where he was really in academia as a liaison between the business community and the academic institution in an institution that was really focused on business and business development for their students. And that campus has grown. I did a presentation for them back in the fall, and I was impressed. I hadn't been there in a while. And it's a nice little campus. And then someone coaxed him into becoming back to DECD and becoming the commissioner. And I'm really excited to have him here because I think he shares all the experiences that you and we have on the local level, on the state level. He's watched it evolve, and I think he wants to talk a little bit about that today. And with that, I'll give it to Mike. And Max, are we hooking him up, or have you got a... No.
I'm just going to
Going
that
with-
as well, man. Yeah, thank you, man. Appreciate it. Fantastic, fantastic. Just to start, as Matt pointed out, we go back about 35 years as colleagues, and you've got one of the best in the business, quite frankly, here. The one thing actually you might have mentioned or didn't mention, Matt, that you left out is I actually worked at the municipal level for about 13 years in the city of Augusta. So that was where I really got all my scars, I think. So because oversaw economic development, the state airport, believe it or not, the electrical network that they actually control there, and many other things, street traffic lights too. Who would have thought? But actually really loved doing that. And then from there got a call from then actually JP Morgan on the private equity side to start Summit Natural Gas, which I got into the energy field for a little bit, but really wanted to get back into economic development. And as Matt pointed out, I got a call out of the blue. And just if you could be very honest, is anybody here from the press? Not from the press. I just want to make sure how real can I get here in raw? I told my boss, I said, hey, look, I'm ready to retire after this. I'm not running for public office. And she said, well, that's good. You have conviction. I said, well, I hopefully get to say what I want to say. And the important part about it is that I was talking to Matt previously. There are some really serious things moving in the economy, not only Maine, but really nationally. And this is really the backdrop that I really wanted to talk to you about, because much of what I've been doing in the last 8 months is to try to sort out where the puck's going and not where it's been, kind of the old Wayne Gretzky thing. The difficulty is in the past, well, actually the difficulty now versus what was in the past was in the past, things didn't shift as quickly structurally, and businesses had the opportunity to sort of bumble along if they weren't that good at what they did, and they still survived. I'm here to tell you today that that's just not the case, right? And you all know that. So how do we have healthy communities and a healthy business economy is exceedingly important. I want to talk about the challenge. I want to depress you first. Matt, do I have like 10 minutes to depress? I can depress people a little bit. Let's just get that over with, because there's some good news here. The difficulty is at the federal and sort of the U.S. economy. There are some real tectonic shifts in how we do business. Wall Street has now chewed up and spit out Main Street for the most part. They used to be the grease where Main Street and communities were the cogs. They've now become the biggest cog in their own machine, right? And the difficulty there is we send every other week our 401k dollars to who? Oh, yeah. The same folks who are actually then going out and buying and inflating asset values across the country. And that's not a conspiracy. That's actually a real thing happening, right? And so how do we actually compete in that world? So that's a structural component where if you think about this, the bigs are getting real big. Today's report, I was actually listening to Bloomberg. I'm somewhat obsessed with this stuff, and I wish I could stop, but I think that's how I'm wired. Walmart's ecom business, double-digit growth in percentage, right? They're not losing to Amazon. They're beating, right, as to what's happening in sort of the regional local economies. So what's happened, right, and you can see I'm not my first rodeo, as Matt pointed out. The difference maker is that it's very difficult to have small and mid-sized businesses in a local and regional economy when the big structurally at the top are just sucking that wealth away from Main Street and downtown, right? And that's just the nature of it. It's one of those things where I have no ability at the state level, nor does my boss, to pull a lever or push a button. That is a structural framework in which we have to work in. So that's really sort of the big nature. How do we basically outrun that? We hear the footsteps. It's behind us. We get it. But how do we outrun that? And the good news is that there really is pathways here. And as we speak, we're working on those. Let's just talk about some other challenges, though. Matt had given me some background information of what you all are feeling in the Mid-Coast and essentially in Maine in general. Let's just come right out and say it. We just made less 18-year-olds 18 years ago. I'm a real serious math nerd. My kid had gone on to become a theoretical mathematician. That's what she does, right? I'm just a math nerd. We just can't get out around the fact that we have less cohort in the 18 to 25-year-old band. And here's the other thing too, as almost a 60-year-old person, it's not their fault. Let's stop blaming the 18 to 25-year-olds. It's not their fault. The reality was, right, there were 3 of me for 1 job back when I was young, right? Up until a few months ago, there was about 1.5 jobs for that 1 person coming out of college. What that means is that they can be highly selective. They go where they want to go. I'd been a professor in business, as Matt pointed out, for about a decade, right before this job. They are wired different than my generation. They will question why you're asking them to do it. And you know, good for them. Good for them. They got it right. They don't do meaningless, mindless stuff. They want to know why. They want to have an impact. It's our job to make sure that they find a place where they are having a meaningful impact. And when you can do that, I'll be honest with you, these younger people are smart. They get it, but they're not going to do mediocre tasks like in the old economy when I was in there. The other part too, there's a skills gap, right? We know this. Of the people that are available, we've not skilled them up for the new opportunities that are present in many of our companies. Most of which I'll talk about in a bit are more technologically advanced. They're more processed and they're more automated. I see people on the streets all the time, and I do have a heart. I have a heart. I just want to share this with you. I grew up in Fairfield, Maine, in a mill town. The mills all had gone away. I personally had to deconstruct a paper mill in one of my jobs, and it hit me right here. That's where my ancestors literally worked. I have people come up and they say, "Hey, you're that city guy." Where's this going, right? And then you're not working hard enough to bring the paper mill back. Here's the difficulty. I will tell you, I actually worked in the paper mill to put myself through college. I loved that job, and I loved those people. The difficulty, right, is even in automation and new investment, those opportunities went away. Strangely enough, our state has business incentives that are tied to the sort of older heritage industries, where new investment has to equate with new employment. That's really tough, right? Because in effect, larger companies who can make those big investments, in effect, are compensating for the lack of the numbers of people that are available to work. So we're in a real quandary here where companies have to make bigger investments now because there's a skill gap and lack of people to begin with. So it's an interesting twist on a theme here. Let me just ask you a direct question. Everybody in this room, please be honest. Who in your family, direct, either sibling, your children, your spouse is in manufacturing? Raise them high. Look around. Here's an interesting twist on a theme. Because of that statistic I gave you, that there are more younger people in a sense than the jobs, or actually more jobs as it were than people. Excuse me, I want to get that right. They're highly selective. If they are exposed to something, they have more of a predisposition to be involved in that industry. My dad was in manufacturing. My grandfather was in manufacturing. My siblings were. I actually worked in the paper industry. Here's a twist. Before my daughter became a theoretical mathematician, she's a chemical engineer in the paper industry. How'd she get there? Because I brought my daughter to work one day and she liked the idea of big machinery. My grandfather owned a metals shop. We were in and around the garage, right? And that's the idea here. We have to get exposure to what's going on in our real economy here in Maine, right? At a much younger level. Here's what's interesting. The governor had asked me the other day, I've been here, I think 8 months now. And she said at the 6-month mark, what did I see? What's really happening, I think, here too, is that a lot more of the issues in our labor force, as well as our community, are more individual level issues, right? When I first started this 35 years ago, it was power, SOAR, taxation, three-phase power, all of that. All still important, mind you, all still important. But really what's weighing heavy, I think, on a lot of Mainers as well as Americans is housing, healthcare, childcare, transportation. I took this for granted. I grew up at a time, funny enough, and Daryl knows this. I grew up at a time where the American muscle cars were a big deal, and they were pushing GTOs to the side of the road you could buy for like $500, right? So I grew up as a real gearhead because my grandfather had a metal shop, and we were always working on American muscle cars. To this day, we still do. The difficulty, though, is you can't go and buy a $500 car and have that thing be roadworthy. Used cars, right? Astronomically expensive. Average car, someone was talking in the VW line has like 35 different computer sensors to start with, right? Transportation is beyond a lot of people reach in the workforce as they start out. We talk about workforce training real quickly. We're talking much more. How do we solve some of these things? We're going to get to this. It's not all depressing, I hope. Housing issues. I know particularly you all folks in this region are feeling a heavy burden on housing. I think later in the program, you talked about policy. We've got to figure this out as well, not only at the federal and state level, but on the local level. I'm just going to share this with you, pour my heart out. Please be generous if you wouldn't mind, because I'm being honest. I oversaw code enforcement for 13 years in the city of Augusta, a city that I absolutely love, my state capital. It meant a lot as a kid to actually go there and be someone who's part of that community. I often dreamed as overseeing codes is why couldn't we have pre-permitted, ready-built plans that we just came in and went bang, bang, bang as a community? What ended up happening was, with good intention, buffer yards became to be longer. Street setbacks became to be further. Tolerance became to be lower. And what we ended up having is this mosaic of extremely difficult, layered land use ordinance on top of building code that's gotten to be exceedingly hard to interpret by most local communities. Ineffective to some degree, and I will blame myself at being as part of that sort of regime. We kind of did a lot of this to ourselves. And it's really important that we start to unwind this. The good news is actually I'd asked the governor, could I chair this innovation housing task force? We just had a report that we released probably 3 or 4 days. Please look this up. We are trying desperately with the professionals in the industry, as well as people at the municipal level, to unwind this in a responsible way, right? How do we actually look at the issue of needing, I think it's 84,000 housing units, and the average builder builds 1.5 a year? Again, I tell you, I love math. The math doesn't work for us, right? We've got to figure this out in a much different way. A lot of that is going to be pre-production homes, component style homes built actually in factories. And we've got to figure out a way where we socially can come to an acceptance that that's okay, because that's where it's going. We do a thing like we talk about vertical integration, trying to get younger people exposed to those industries. We have a program in my department called Maine Career Exploration Program. It's fantastic. We're moving down as far as we can where students become sort of career conscious. So roughly around the 6th grade. If you think about what vertical integration might look like, one of our employees on the coast here, BIW, is absolutely killing this. They have figured out that they just can't wait for someone to graduate and then try to have them figure out, is BIW an option? They're pushing STEM and some of this other programmings down into the 6th and 7th grade so students can have fun with actually more of a trade-based education and job. Interestingly enough, my friends may not even know this about me, but I have 2 certification levels of welding. I told the governor, when I'm done this job in 12 months, I'm going to go weld on those ships. I'm enamored by what they do there. It is unbelievable. I'm going to go weld there. I went into BIW's training facility not long ago, maybe a couple of months, and this was amazing. And to get younger people there, I was amongst probably 100 young people, and they were playing on the riggings, virtually. They had the Halo port on, and they're virtually moving parts. They're actually doing a virtual welding booth and also a virtual paint booth. And it's essentially something that relates to younger people because they do like that joystick, right, world. But it feels, I told someone, other than the smell of the welding slag, this feels like I'm doing it. And they're like, that's the point, right? But I think there's a lot of our employees who are getting this stuff right. But let's just talk real quickly housing, right? We know the current variables. Labor is a real issue. And again, I talked about this. Because we made less of these younger workers, we have to figure out what happens here. The other part too, many of us are either from Maine or we came here because we love it. I'm a kid born in Fairfield, Maine, Somerset County boy, right? Everywhere I drive, there's a tree. Why isn't there not a component factory on every darn corner in this state making something that's part of the housing production chain? We're asking this question. We're asking it at a much higher level. We're asking it now with people who own the land, who log the land, who process the actual lumber, and then who make it in the factory. We're trying to get to understand right down to the actual problem of what's the obstacle here. Because I can't believe as many trees that are here in Maine, and they're not basically going from what I call like food to table. I call it tree to house, right? And not tree house, although I do like those. But it's like, how do we take that tree out of the woods and convert it into something meaningful in the housing supply chain here in Maine? And I realize this should not be a question in 2025, but we have to ask that question to get through the other side. I go back to that sort of ready build. At the community level, we've got to figure out what will actually keep us moving forward. When I first got to the city of Augusta, there was a different mentality about how the code process worked. We had to change that because what you do not want to hear from a developer, a realtor, or an investor is, yeah, I don't like to do business in your community because I can't figure out if there's a beginning, a middle, or an end, right? You can still have tough zoning. You can still get what you want as a municipality to make sure that the bar is higher. But people need to know on the front end that there's an ending point, right? There's got to be a fairness about it that, yes, we know your community has a high standard, but you're fair and you've identified what you want on the other end. Let's talk about energy real quick because I actually went into that world a little bit myself. Maine is in a real interesting situation, right? We don't sit on oil, natural gas, or coal. So it does put, and we're at the end, as it were, of the line. I'd worked for a former governor. Actually, I've worked for a Democrat, an independent, and a Republican. So I'm a rare bird in government. I've actually run the gauntlet here. And a former governor had always said it's so important to make sure that a fish doesn't leave Maine with its head on, right? That was a statement that we used to make. So value added is really, really important. But also in the energy side of this, right? What we do have, we have to figure out at grid scale how we actually can deploy these resources, whether it be wind, whether it be solar, whether it actually be biomass, right? And even for the things that we do have coming into the state, whether it be liquid fuels or natural gas, we've got to figure out through the energy plan that we do have what we can do to double down to try to control that cost. Because traditionally, we have been in the part of the world where energy generation has been more expensive than others. So I'm not blind to that. I know that businesses are questioning, how do we get through to the other side? But I think strategic investments in energy are going to be really important. And that also means, here it comes, it might have to be close or near or in a community near you, right? And that's the other part of it, where I think as Mainers, we all have to kind of come together to figure out, is there opportunity to solve it in our own somewhat, available geography? I want to talk about big structural initiatives. When I told the governor when I first came in, I know we have limited time. It was 21 months when I came. And she said, I'd love to have you focus on 4 things, Mike. So life sciences, blue economy, forest products, and maritime industries. Now, the funny thing is she led with life science. She said, I'd really like to see life sciences move to the next level. There's so many good things that have happened in the last several years. And she said, I'd like to have a life sciences center. And I literally jumped in. I said, Governor, can I stop you? She said, sure. I said, we don't have a life sciences center? And she said, no, why would you ask? I said, because I've been doing this for 35 years, working with 5 governors. Are you kidding me? She says, we do not have one, Mike. And I said, if I do nothing else for you, we will have one before you and I leave. Last month, we announced that we have a life sciences center here in Maine. Why that's important is because we have so many dots out there on the landscape that all we really have to do is take a step back, figure out how we work together to roll that up. I laugh about this. I said, I love math. I'm going to trick you. I'm a 1 + 1 = 3 kind of guy, right? We've got to figure out how we really exponentially leverage some of the things that we have. When you talk life sciences, here's a crazy thought. You ever hear of Massachusetts? Yeah, they're kind of big, right? They're kind of good at life sciences. Believe it or not, institutions and companies that do life sciences, we're only second to Massachusetts in New England. And that says a lot, right? If you take a look at New England, Connecticut, New York, not New York. I deal with them on the Atlantic side. Sorry about that, New York. But Rhode Island, Connecticut, Mass, New Hampshire, Vermont, and so forth, right? These are states that have incredible educational institutions. We know that. Yet Maine is right up there, right? Just keep naming them, right? Jackson Lab, Bigelow, right? Down East Research, just keep going. All we really need to do is figure out how we actually leverage that up. That's part of this whole thing. Blue economy, right? That's right in your wheelhouse. A ton of our GDP comes from basically what I would say is the blue economy. Anything that deals with ocean related, whether it be commercial, military, aquatic sciences, aquaculture, fishing, lobstering. That is a big, big part of who we are. To literally figure out how do we secure those industries going forward is part of that blue economy initiative. We are in the second stage of that. There will be sort of a task force review of where we were at. My point to my boss was, I do not want to see a report that I'm part of that says Maine needs to make sure there's more value added for its forest and ocean resources. We've done that for 35 years. I'm looking for pathways. I'm looking for experts in those industries to identify what the opportunities are as well as the obstacles. And I told her, I'm on the very end, late quarter of my career here. I don't have time. I want this to happen. And so I think calling up and really pushing forward and identifying those opportunities is what's going to move certainly that blue economy forward. Forest products, again, I'm going to mention that. I realize it may not be as big a part of your economy, but many of your businesses are really important in that supply chain, whether it be engineering, equipment development, or technology. We've got to make sure all of these pieces are working together. Maritime industries, I probably don't need to go on to tell you how important that is to this region. More importantly, how it is to the entire state. So what you're doing here really does have a big impact on where we can be in the future here in Maine. I want to talk a little bit more about favorable trends for Midcoast. At one point in time, I actually had the distinct pleasure of having Matt's job. I actually oversaw the Midcoast Council for Business Development and the Council of Government. I love it down here. This is a special place. Having the ability to travel all around Maine, I love all of Maine. But clearly, when you think about Maine, where you all live just does certainly come to light, right? There's something going on. There's an old song, I think it's Buffalo Springfield, isn't it? Something going on around here, right? And there's something going on around here. There is a demand for, in effect, differently sourced protein, right? So aquaculture in all its many stages is becoming really, really significant and a lot more important than it might have been even 10 years ago. What we're seeing are the communities that can actually house these opportunities. We have to figure out what is good for both business and the community. And it's becoming really difficult, in effect, to site many of these facilities here in Maine because, in effect, policy and sort of local ordinance development. We have to figure out what we want. if this is something where we see that's important for our economy to grow and for other people to literally have future and careers here in Maine, that's one that's extremely important. Interestingly enough, as Mainers, basically, we are the engine behind a lot of that resource and research going into that industry, whether it be Maine, whether it be UNE, or now the Rue Institute, which is a newer organization down in Portland. But boy, I'll tell you, they've only been here for 5 years, but what they've done in 5 years on the scene has been utterly amazing. So I think the truth is here, moving forward and working with you at the community level is exceedingly important. I've done this long enough to realize that it's not going to happen necessarily entirely at the state level. The state only has so many levers and buttons to push and pull. Most of economic development, if not all, is done right in the trenches of the communities that you represent. Matt just led with something real interesting. It is not lost on me. I'll tell you, if anyone's in this industry, you have to understand good planning in order to do good community development. You have to understand good community development before you can do good economic development. So one begets the other. And if you start in economic development with no idea of how the other two sides work, it's actually something that you're going to be frustrated with, because you've got to understand how the machine actually works and where you can push and pull on that to make it happen. Destination tourism and experience, I think a lot of it goes to say that that's you are it, right? We look towards you to get that right for the state of Maine. More people, I think, that are going into tourism as far as the experience. I shouldn't say not on the employee side, but people like me, tourism, I'm going somewhere and I'm utilizing what you have for resource. I think it's the attention span. We don't seem to have a great attention span. So experiences are becoming the thing. So the ability to move our tourism industry in a way where the experience is basically front and center to that is going to be exceedingly important. That means working with other people in our region and outside our region. It's very difficult now to simply say, I own a bed and breakfast on the coast of Maine. It has to be something where it draws people's attention. A bunch of my friends got together and they said to me, hey, let's go to Bentonville, Arkansas. And I said, so I can look at the Walmart headquarters? And they're like, no, you idiot. It's like the playground for adult mountain biking. And holy smokes, they are absolutely spot on right? So now Bentonville, Arkansas becomes this amazing destination in this one niche. We have the Office of Outdoor Recreation in my department, and I think they're doing a killer job of identifying what those opportunities are. Rightfully or wrong, right? Wrongfully. I always tell people, look, I'm not here to judge which way this is going. I'm trying to figure out where that puck is. People want the Mountain Dew experience now with vacations, right? They want to jump out of a plane, juggle fireballs, land on a mountain bike, go over a crest of a mountain, and then run apparently a marathon. That's like a big thing for a lot of them, right? However, we are in that sort of supply chain to figure that out of how we can accommodate those individuals is going to be highly important for us to move, I think, that tourism and eco tourism economy forward. Arts and culture, educational institutions, you know what you have here. They are the brass ring, right? To make sure we can actually package that in a way that speaks to our heritage, but also I think that future going forward to people who may also not only just be in state, but obviously people from outside the state. It's going to be exceedingly important to do that. I'm going to try to wrap this up before Matt gives me the hook. I could talk about this stuff all day, right? The point being here is I was talking to Matt about this. What's going on here? The reality is, in the day when you had a much more robust local and regional economy based against that initial framework, as I was talking about nationally, when you had that, it was different. The difficulty is right now is that we're clinging on as much as we can to that regional and local economy as much as it's possible, right? There are other forces. You may have heard of companies like Amazon, just throwing that out there, right? That is a factor. It's legitimate. It's happening. At the same time, the companies that are in Maine who have figured out what their lane is, and they've been good at innovating what the product demand and product fit is in the market, are doing exceptionally well. The tough part, and I share this with you, and please, if you're in a company or in an industry like this and you want to talk about it, I'd love to pick your brain. It's really difficult to be a commodity business in that middle area where you don't have something necessarily that's different than what the larger market can provide. I grew up in a small business. I don't think necessarily we were exceptionally good at it, but we did pretty decent because we were the only option, right? It's not the case anymore. So I'm working with a lot of businesses that the headline to this is innovation has to get us to that next step. So trends and speed, as we talked about, really require a different approach to business. So we are working really closely with any business that wants to listen of how do we create an operating system that's based on innovation as a principle. Got a great organization in my shop called Maine Technology Institute. I've absolutely been a huge fan of what these folks have done for the last 20 something years. We need to fund it at a higher level because in real dollars, the economy where it's at, we do not provide as much R&D dollars per GDP as we really need to because we have a lot of things going on that are great. We got to double down though. And instead of putting one chip, we got to put 3 chips on that. That's my 1 + 1 = 3, right? But when we talk about operating systems, we need to work with businesses to figure out where they can go to that next step along with state and federal assistance if needed and available of how we get them to where they can actually become profitable and flourish. When I talk about who's doing well and why, I laugh about this because this is the former Governor King's statement, right? The value added thing is real. It's a big deal. The companies that are really doing exceptional in Maine have figured out where their sort of their niche is or niche, and they are absolutely some of the best at this worldwide. We actually, and you probably know this, we have worldwide leading edge companies here in Maine that are absolutely doing fantastic, but it's based more on innovation. That vertically focused approach, we've got to start working with our younger people in the economy. I had a younger lady who had been one of my students. We talked about COVID, and I said, it's time to move on. We're trying to really move forward and stuff. And she outmathed me. She literally outmathed me. She said, Mr. Duguay, that's great. 4 years against your 60. I'm talking 4 years against my 20. This is a big deal for me and my friends as to what COVID was. Didn't have graduation, didn't have homecoming, right? They didn't have prom. Think about it just on a personal level. I'm old, but I can remember those things vividly because they left an important impression. A lot of our younger people out there in that cohort have grown up where they didn't have that experience, right? And it is real for them. So I think the important part about it is figuring out how we integrate them, as it were, into our companies and really get beyond the idea that it's so different. We're all sort of working in that economy where things are changing quickly. But I just would say, let's be empathetic. Let's have some grace with our newer talent coming into the workforce because we're going to need them in a big way, right? Anybody hear of this thing? AI? You hear about this thing, right? My dad passed away at 96, and it was so funny. He was a guy he just loved news. He'd go through and just chew it all up. And he says to me before he passed away, about a couple months into it, he says, Mike, I've been following this economy thing. This internet thing's going to be big someday. And I thought about it, I laughed, and I said, dang, he's right, right? The Internet of Things, connectivity of device, AI, right? Does anybody here use an AI piece of software on their desk? Put your hands up high. Take a look, right? Take a look. This is happening at astonishing speeds. Point is, in college world, when it first came out, my colleague said, we got to put the genie in the bottle. We got to make sure that students aren't cheating. And I guess I'd think different and said, if we're not going to be its master, we are going to be its slave. And I want my students, right, to go out there. I want my state. We are small, you guys, right? We're small. We should be nimble, right? And quick on this. So AI task force just came out. I want to say something that we've been busy. I got to tell you, I haven't slept much. Probably why my caffeine induced diatribe here is going strong. But we had this AI task force report that we also have just recently put out. It is absolutely eye-opening of what's going on and also opportunity going forward to harness that along with our business and our municipal community, right? We run this thing called Business Answers in my office. Anybody ever hear of this? Yeah. I come in and I said, how would you like a mini you working 24/7, just interacting with businesses? It's where we got to be. We're not there, but that's where we've got to be. So I'll leave it at that. And hopefully I didn't scare anybody. And hopefully you'll be fair with me because I like to be really direct and honest. Why? Because I've done this too long to not have the real conversation. And again, I say, I just don't want my predecessor to come in, or my successor, excuse me, to come in and say, we need to have more value added product leave Maine. I just feel that we're way beyond that. We know what we've got to do. Can we work together and work with you all to get it done? So I ask for your help in doing that. As Matt will know this, I brought natural gas to Maine. I do not duck people. If you have a concern with anything I've said and you want to challenge it, call me. I will talk with you. Because quite frankly, I don't think I have the answers. I'm looking for them, but I'm running out of time. So thank you.
Thank you. We got a moment. Anybody have a quick question? Something that's moved them? Jane.
On some of these endeavors. And so I'm from St. George, and we have a number of aquaculture businesses in our town. And yes, this is a path forward, but the regulatory burden, the delays, the length of time it takes those people to get permits, not very many people can afford 7 years before they make a dollar, and that clearly is something the state can help with. So I just wanted to pass that along.
I'm going to be real. I'm going to be real raw here. God, please be generous to me if you could. I think, honestly, having seen other places around the country, I think Maine people are really fair. I think we really are people who, if you tell us the real story and you get down to brass tacks and make the ask, we are pretty darn fair. The hard part, what has happened is we've stacked on, regulation. And what we have is this sort of mosaic that it's so difficult for anyone to even do the right thing, I would argue. There are communities, and you know them, they want these things to happen, yet somehow regulatory and the process doesn't allow it to happen within a timeline. And I know this for a fact, having worked for a very large equity firm. They're not going to wait 7 years to put money at risk. I always say this to folks, and this is something that's, I think, one of my mentors told me, might have even been now, but it goes where it's wanted and it stays where it's appreciated. And people may not like to hear that. I say it a lot in the legislative halls because that's the darn truth, right? And that's where we've got to be. I totally hear you. In fact, my colleague, Commissioner Loizen, she's a rock star, and she's basically dealing with these, DEP commissioner, dealing with this every day, trying to figure out how do we responsibly site development, but allow a beginning, a middle, and an end. Yes, ma'am. Oh, totally excited. Yeah.
Just 1 second, very quickly. Did people on Zoom hear that question? Do you mind just handing the mic off for that?
Yeah, we can't hear any questions when they're asked.
Mike, you mentioned that using pre-approved plans to facilitate development in Augusta when you were a CEO. I wasn't sure if you said that worked well or not.
I think at the time that I brought it up, it was considered to be a Renaissance man idea, radical. And I don't think people took it seriously enough. And the irony is that other states are doing it and it's serious. So I would say to you that the idea unfortunately never made it into policy. That's the hard part. And again, I'm not saying it was the right thing at the right time. I think it is the right thing at this time. Yeah.
There's a question from Jay in Harpswell. Jay?
Hi, thanks, Max. I appreciate your comments tremendously. Your comment about empathy around COVID, younger people having lived through COVID. I'm thinking about empathy toward our heritage industries. You mentioned lumber, and aquaculture's come up. I'm in Harpswell, where we have the longest coastline in the state, a lot of fisheries, and a lot of aquaculture coming. We're trying to find the balance. And the governor has been, in my opinion, a tremendous champion for the fishing industries. And the regulatory issue is difficult, as somebody just said. And there are forces trying to put the various fisheries against each other outside of government. So I just think finding that balance of respecting our heritage industries, the people who are in them now, as innovation comes, we're trying to find that balance. And I guess I just wanted to put out there that the balance is a tricky one. And I appreciate change, innovation, but finding the balance to keep what makes people want to come to Maine in the first place. Thanks.
Yeah, I think that's a great comment. And it just sort of struck something in my mind. Most of those industries that you had mentioned are exceedingly capital intensive, right? And what I hear a lot is we'd be willing to make that investment if we knew the goalposts weren't going to change. And that's so important. So I guess I look at it and say, if you want to be obviously the brass, ring, identify up front for business what you're interested in and what you're not, in fairness, right? I would literally tell you, I think I worked for probably one of the premier city managers in the state of Maine, Bill Bridgio. I tell you, I don't think there's anybody better. Yes. Yeah. No, Bill. Bill was amazing. And Bill always said, you say what you do and you do what you say, and you're upfront about it so that if you don't want something, you're not sort of mincing words with a business or a community, right? You get right to the point. And I think that's important because under Bill's time, Augusta went from a community that was probably in a standing 8 count. Had Bill not been there, I think in a year or so following, the tax rate would have increased about 50%. That's insolvency in Maine, right? Bill masterfully recreated that entire economy. And it was just basically out of telling people up front what the city wanted and how it was going to get to the other side of it. So I think that's important. But the problem is you're talking businesses that need, when they make investments, it's $50 to $100 million. They don't have the ability to get it wrong and get some, halfway through a process and feel that the goalposts are moved. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Unfortunately, I have to roll. I apologize, but I'm really curious on that about local policy and how that actually.
We will get back to you on a regular basis because these guys will be doing strategic planning again before long.
Yeah. And seriously, this is not, I'm not doing anything for. If you take exception to anything I have to say, and if you have a good, compelling ability to help me see it differently, please call me personally or email me. And that if you could.
And I can do that, and I can tell you that he does answer his emails.
I work for you, and I want to get this right for you. So if you have a thought, or if there's opportunities that yes, sir. And I hope you'll watch this.
And we're recording it, so we'll get it to. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. take a quick break, stretch your arms. I haven't gotten to the bathroom yet since I got here, so that's where I'm going.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for getting quickly back into your seats. So we can move on to our next presentation, which I'm excited about. Why bad land use policy leads to bad financial policy. And we have Kevin Sutherland here in person, Jim Tischler live on Zoom. First, talking a little bit about the session. So this is, problems that we all face: crumbling infrastructure, budget deficits, deferred maintenance, strained budget negotiations. These are all symptoms of a chronic lack of funding that comes to a head annually in the budget process. Breaking the cycle requires a fundamental rethink of the relationship between infrastructure, finance, and land use, known as the whole life cycle of municipal budgeting model. When applied systemically, this alternative approach provides a platform for municipal budgeting that is based in a land use pattern that strengthens rather than erodes the tax base, positioning communities for greater financial and land use security. Jim, who you can't see behind the mirror. Jim is a visiting fellow from the University of Windsor Law Center for Cities, working with students and faculty on various topics and creating applied research.
You're good. I turned it off.
Okay, perfect. Creating applied research and practice projects. He's a principal member of the center's Housing Systems Innovation Lab and their ongoing developing project work. Some of you may be also familiar with Jim as he serves as the development director for the State of Michigan Land Bank Authority. And in this role, he leads the agency's land and project development operations and staff, coordinates state-sponsored development and redevelopment projects, and consults regional local development and land bank entries in their projects. He has more than 38 years of experience in the fields of urban planning, real estate, community and economic development, and redevelopment, working for public organizations and consulting private sector firms. Mr. Tischler holds a Master of Urban Planning degree from Wayne State and a graduate certificate from the University of Oklahoma Economic Development Institute. His major certifications include Fellow of the American Institute of Certified Planners, Michigan Professional Community Planner, and an international status in the Canadian Institute of Planners. In person, we have Kevin Sutherland. Kevin is currently serves as the town manager in Newcastle, where he brings a mix of strategic planning, fiscal know-how, and down-to-earth problem solving to the job. His leadership style is rooted in curiosity, communication, and the belief that good governance starts with listening. When he's not helping communities thrive, Kevin is usually on the road visiting them or on a personal mission to find Maine's best burgers, pizzas, and local brews. And he has strong opinions and a running list if you are interested. I'm going to put him on the spot now. So what's our closest access to Owl's Head Transportation Museum for one of your best burgers, pizza, or brews?
The general store right here in Owl's Head has one of the 30 greatest burgers in Maine. So if you haven't been there, maybe not lunch today because there's one provided for after our presentation, but they'll definitely one to check out.
You say 30 best burgers in Maine. Is that on your list or is that?
Oh, no, this was a Down East magazine a few years ago, had the 30 greatest burgers in Maine. And my wife and I decided after we tried one that we were going to eat all 30 of them in 1 year. So we went around the state and had explored all of those burgers. There's an Instagram account about it, but we'll talk about it later.
And with that, I'll turn it over to Kevin and Jim.
Thank you. Jim, are you alive?
I am. Can you hear me?
Hey, there he is. It's the voice of God, everyone. Or Jim. Jim, do you want to start this off?
Sure, be happy to. Thanks, Kevin. It's a pleasure to be with you all this morning. Good morning to you all from 800 miles away here in the great state of Michigan. I have a lot of colleagues and friends in the great state of Maine, and looking forward to getting back up there real soon. What you're going to see here today is a slight variation of a presentation that we gave at the Build Maine conference back in June of this year. And we've also, me personally, I've been talking to a few other practitioners in other states and across the border in Canada on the similar topic. But we're going to come back to the focus context about you all and your communities. And I was the segue of there's not enough money is a really good one to kick this off. These images in this first slide, I can't see you, but I suspect if I ask the question, do you have something like this in your town? Everybody's raising their hands, probably, right? There isn't enough money. But the next question to ask is, why is there not enough money? And that's what's led us to do some early stage review investigations. I've been involved with this for about 4 years. Kevin's been with me most of that time in various conversations and discussions up your way in Maine and down my way here in Michigan. And I think the start to solution is to better understand what we've got and the system and how the system needs to be reformatted to better understand to get where we need to go. So Kevin, do you want to move the slide?
Yes, sir.
This is not new news to any of you. We have an infrastructure crisis. It's been going for decades. You can describe it as either being a funding problem, a national security threat, or down in my neck of the woods, it was the principal source of the bankruptcy of the city of Detroit. Now, this year actually is the 10-year anniversary of the grand bargain that was the negotiated settlement for getting the city of Detroit out of its bankruptcy. The city is doing very well these days. It had 2 years of population growth now, but deep getting it past the weeds of all the issues that are there at core, the Detroit bankruptcy was a simple econometric calculation. There was too much infrastructure out across the 162 square miles of the city and not enough revenue per acre or land area because of population loss to cover the costs of the maintenance of that infrastructure. So over time, what the city had to do was to refinance in large bulk, and then refinance in large bulk, and then refinance in large bulk. And then 2012, the last time they tried to refinance, the market said, we ain't financing you. And that's what led to the city's bankruptcy. And that lesson is a really critical lesson for every municipality across the United States, including your great state. Because what I'm going to say next might be a bold, shocking statement, but it is the fact that unless your town or your city is 100% natural lands or 100% agricultural lands without any infrastructure or very little infrastructure, you're likely on a long-term trajectory to insolvency, much like what happened to Detroit. Now, let me explain these next slides, why I said that. Here's from early this year, the national numbers for you. Across the country, we're facing a gap of about $3.7 trillion between the needs of existing infrastructure replacement and the funding sources all taken together to make that happen. Now, this was before, I believe this was before the infrastructure bill of the Biden era infrastructure bill. So if you're going to ask, okay, how did that impact? Because there was a chunk of money brought forward there. Well, it reduced that gap by about 1.2 billion. So great, but we're still staring down about the $2.5 billion of gap going. And this is not unrecognized. As you can see here, that the American Society of Civil Engineers, this has been studied for years. What I see in this graphic is a potential plan, their grand challenge. Everybody's recognizing we need to identify new funding sources to address the infrastructure needs. All right. But here's the issue, which is it's not necessarily just we need more money to pay for our costs. You can move the slide again, Kevin, because something's gonna come into play. If we keep trying to refinance or get new money sources without understanding the root of the problem, what we're really doing is we're running down a pyramid scheme. And at some point, it will blow up like what happened in Detroit at not just national scale or state scale, but down to your town scale. You can advance the next slide. So literally, the need is to rethink this in a systems context, because right now, as municipalities, you're budgeting, looking at your infrastructure on an annual basis. I know Maine does a little bit of capital planning. We'll talk about that in a few slides. All right. But you're looking at it in a short-term situation and not thinking or considering the context of the whole life cycle. And that is the foundational element of linking these three areas of assets, finance, and land use. So how does the public think about, or how do we think about infrastructure? Well, the public thinks about it from what they see on the street or in their house, whether it's the water coming into their house through the sink, or the road construction, or the park work, streetscapes, or the orange barrels on the street. So that's how the public thinks. Now, as municipal practitioners or regional practitioners, you're thinking not just at grade, you're thinking below grade. What are the pipes? What are the water? What are the sewer lines? What are all those infrastructure sets that need to be understood? And what are the budgets to do their repair replacements? Click one more time, Kevin. But your finance people are thinking in terms of two major categories. One is GASB, or Governmental Accounting Standards Board, policy number 34, which requires municipalities to value their infrastructure. The other, that's based upon ISO 55000, which is the International Standards for Asset Management. Okay, now keeping in mind that GASB 34 and ISO 55000, those are two different versions of looking at the issue of infrastructure. One is on value, the other is on management of assets. Once again, the various sectors, including the public, are looking at the problem from their own siloed approach, not thinking about it from a systemic standpoint, ergo the need to rethink. Next slide. In Maine, my understanding, I've been corrected a couple times, is that there is not a standard or not a statute requiring all municipalities to do capital improvements programs. My state, that's a requirement for any municipality that engages in land use planning and development regulation. But there are a number of municipalities, I understand, in Maine that actually do this on a voluntary or some sort, or a regional, perhaps, or local basis to go. And that's a good start, because now you're looking at the cost in the short term for your streets, your sewers, your sanitaries, all your electricity, all your infrastructures to go. Next slide.
Jim, can I just say that some communities have charters that have capital improvement plans as part of those communities. But
great, thank you.
Statewide, we do not have a statute that requires it.
About
usually 5 years.
Okay, thank you for that, Kevin. Appreciate that. Yep. About a third of the states have this in statutory format. You can see here in this slide, this is a summary of what Michigan requires. I was describing that in a few minutes ago, or moments ago, that planning commissions are required to adopt 6-year capital improvement plans. Now, what's 6 years? It's a 5-year, it's a budget for the next year and the subsequent 5 years after that. So if a municipality engages in comprehensive planning and regulation, they are required by law to do that. It's a commingle across the states. There's no one standard, but this is a start. But I'm going to show you how that relates to the entire context of systems thinking. Next slide. It's critically important that it's an understanding of this relationship. We think that this is part of the key missing keys to understanding the system construct here. You have these three elements: assets, which is infrastructure, finance, and land use. And it runs this way. Infrastructure assets provide for the use of land. Next, click again. Land uses provide value, which is taxed for revenue. Next click. The revenue finances the infrastructure assets. Next click. Each element relies upon the other. One more click. And it's a system which operates continuously. So in other words, not thinking next year, not thinking 5 years from now, or 6 years from now, or 10 years from now, but the entire life cycle of infrastructure. If you click the next slide, Kevin. I'm going to come back to show you life cycle in just a minute, but let's talk about the mathematics that we mean in terms of revenue raising. Some of you may have seen images like this before. They're really good graphics. This one is produced by Urban 3. Good Joe Minicosi. I know him really, really well. And they're designed to actually get you to rethink how revenue is generated off of value. And I'm talking about property tax here, because most folks think about it in a simple calculation. Your land value of a parcel is multiplied by on its assessment by the prop tax rate paid, and that gives you the revenue that can then be applied to operating or capital expenses. And yes, that works on a parcel basis, but your infrastructure, Kevin, the infrastructure is actually across your entire municipality. So the real calculation that you should be looking at has a value density factor attached to it, meaning that taxes multiplied by the land value density, whether you measure by acre or square meter or whatever measure you choose, that is the key determinant of your asset revenue. And unfortunately, because many municipalities don't think of it this way, they have been permitting or allowing, pursuant to their comprehensive plans, too low density development, which are insufficient to generate enough value to cover the costs of the infrastructure to support it across the life cycle. Next slide. What's that life cycle now? It really is these four elements. And I want to talk it through. You plan and acquire, if it's rolling stock, your infrastructure and construct it. You operate it, you maintain it, and then you also must renew or dispose it, depending upon whether it's a rolling stock or whether it's actual infrastructure to go. And that is the whole life cycle. Click the slide, Kevin. That period is going to range from 5 years, likely your rolling stocks, to 40 years, your streets, your sanitaries, your storms, your electrical, your other infrastructures that are going to be out there in the ground and not come out of the ground. Meaning they don't get rolled up after 40 years and put away. You don't need them anymore. No, you're going to have them ongoing. So the need, click one more time. I think we've got one more click on this. Oh, sorry. This is good, but the need is to think about it. Thank you, Kevin, is a whole life cycle. And planning should be done a whole life cycle. Now think about that as we go forward relative to capital planning for your cities and towns that do it by charter, and like municipalities in Michigan at 6 years here, and your charters are at 10 years, I think. How does that relate to the 40-year life cycle ongoing of the infrastructure? That is a key missing piece of understanding. Next slide. Now, what's been rising in the past decade has been this idea of asset management programming. Canada has been really ahead of the game on this, and a few of the states, my state included, has started to pick up this concept, which is that we not look at infrastructure in our municipality just on an annual or short-term budget or maintenance schedule, but we look at it on an entire ongoing program related to the management of asset across the life cycle from start to finish or renewal. And that's what you're seeing in the 6 steps that are over there on the left side graphic on this screen. The key points is that the asset management program, as a replacement for a capital improvement program, it would include all infrastructure categories and would cover the entire whole life cycle, and would also be structured to provide understanding and net position in real time. In other words, it's an econometrical calculation so that you can see, a municipality can see where they are with their street series or particular streets within that street series on an ongoing basis. The chances are you or your consultants are probably collecting good data points on infrastructure. That's what happens over here in my neck of the woods. The question is, where does that data go? It should go into a comprehensive, ongoing asset management program, which gets updated every year and continues to think ahead of time across the entire life cycle. Next slide.
I'll just point that the state does have, for at least your roads, a system called RSMS, and you can go and collect data about your roads and put that in there, and it does help you analyze what is most critically in need of repair versus what can go longer. So I use that in Newcastle, find that it's a great tool, and it's the first step that we're taking to try to get to this AM program.
Yeah. This little segment slide, this is intended to show you, it's a little small, but you might be thinking, well, what about what about my wastewater plan and my other plan? You currently have probably infrastructure departments or operations in your municipality where they have their own facilities plans. Yes, they do, but they all should feed into or be based on the municipality-wide asset management plan. And that's where this example from Barrie, Ontario, was showing you how all those different plans, including the capital improvement plan, feed into this baseline document, which is understanding it on a municipal-wide scale. Next slide. So you can click through this. We can keep going. So if we think about this from a cross-disciplining systemizing approach, as you saw this graphic before, assets, finance, and land use, the idea is that they are aligned. You align them on the continuous life cycle. You link them econometrically for analysis and forecasting. They become referenced or based on or feed into your short-term asset component plans. You maintain this on a regular basis and it allows each element to be informed from the preceding component. I think there's one more click on this slide.
Yep.
Yep. And used to influence and service success of components. One more click, I think here. Oh, here we go. Yeah. Okay. No, we're good. I think we're good. Oh, yeah. Run this slide until it's all done. Yep. So everybody can see this. So that life cycle on top is what we're talking about. This is linear format. And this is intended to get this issue of the planning horizons in front of you to think about it. So if we consider the asset management life cycle, that 40 years plus or minus, upwards of that, across those four elements, plan, acquire, operate, maintain, how are we doing in terms of capital financing? Well, as with Maine, usually you have a CIP, potentially by charter. My state, it's a 5-year. There might be some misprint here. This is Michigan based here. So our 5-year CIP of financing tied to our land use plan, that's the current practice. The Government Finance Officers Association, just within the past 18 months, made a recommendation that municipalities might consider going to a 20-year CIP finance plan for infrastructure, which is better, but it's not the full life cycle. Now, in land use planning, you're required to have a 10-year comprehensive plan or a 10-year horizon on that comprehensive plan. But how does that relate to the identification of land usage and the calculation of revenue from property tax that can actually cover the cost at level funding or at appropriate funding of your infrastructure so that you're not going into deficit? What we're trying to say with this slide is that your planning horizons are not equivalent. And because they're not equivalent, y'all can't see this. You're looking at it on too short a strategy, or as I was told the other day talking to some folks, I'm dating myself. If you've ever remember watching the TV show Name That Tune, okay, if you played Name That Tune, you got all the notes, you're going to get that tune 100% of the time. If you play Name That Tune and you're given 30 notes, you probably will get that to go. If you're going to name that tune and be asked to do it with 10 notes, well, maybe some risk there. How about 3 notes? That's what it effectively is. You're planning for your future municipal financial balance with 3 notes. And therein lies the risk and the likelihood potential of fiscal insolvency in the long run. So if nothing else, if equalizing the planning horizons gives you a chance to see where you're going in trajectory, that's a first step to understanding where to go next. Now, I think one more slide, Kevin, or I think we're ready to move. Oh, yeah. This is how most municipalities plan. You have a future land use map, which has nice colors. I know there's detail behind it. I like to call these Picasso paintings. Because of the colors. And they show what future land uses are going to be, and it looks good, and it makes sense from us, for most of us planners who can understand this in abstract context. Click the slide, Kevin. But what does that mean in terms of, click it one more time. What does this mean? There we go. What does it mean in terms of value density relative to net? That is the question. Now, this is another image from Urban 3, which shows that certain land uses are going to be much higher than level on their revenue, and certain other land uses are going to be much less, and then those will be in deficit. That should be green, but it shows up as black on this here as well. What's key is the sum total of all that going to be level fund, level balance across life cycle? In this example, the answer is no. Is that this municipality is on track to insolvency because over time they're in deficit on infrastructure right now because they don't have enough money, but that gap is widening, and at some point, if they go try to refinance, they may be told, nope, we can't refinance you because we know you can't cover the cost of the refinance. That's what I'm trying to get at in terms of the fiscal implications of not thinking systemically across the three elements. Next slide.
1 second, Jim. I'm sorry. I'm going
Oh.
to pause real quickly. And
Yep.
this is where when Jim finally gives up the voice and hands it over to me, I'm going to talk about how we solve this problem is by seeing that these black lines end up going up. And that's by doing density in our downtowns, creating more density. So I'm going to talk a lot about that. But Joe Minicozy from Urban 3, if you haven't seen his presentation, he's on YouTube, he's on TED Talks. He's done an incredible job explaining what this is and what it means for our communities. But I'll pass it back over to Jim.
Yeah, thank you for that. One more comment one more comment, and then you got it, Kevin. So Joe is great. Here's if you go back one slide, I want everybody. Okay, right there. What you're looking at is a snapshot of 1 year. Okay, where the science needs to go, and it's not there yet because there's no model on this yet, by the way. Is that this needs to become a series of snapshots projected into the future time. In other words, this goes from a picture to a motion picture so that you can see where you're heading municipally. This doesn't look good, you're right. But how does this relate to your overall fiscal balance in terms of your bottom line? You can't tell that right now because this is 1 year. If you had that in projection, econometric format, you'd be able to project we're going to be good level funded or we are going to hit the wall in 41 years. All right, turn it back to you, Kevin.
Yeah. So if, let's say, this is a neighborhood that you're trying to encourage development in, and you're looking currently there's a couple of buildings that are 1 story, there's a couple that are 2. The zoning allows for 4. So you're trying to encourage 4 stories of development. What'll happen is these will pop up and these negatives will start to come up. So eventually you want everything in this image to look black, or the reds are offset by the blacks. So you might want your farmland to remain red because you care about having agriculture close to your community, or forestry that isn't going to be developed. You're willing to, as a community, subsidize that, but you need to make sure that as a whole, you're not in the red. You're working towards that black. So Jim's right. I think the visual that would show year over year over year of improvement is what you're trying to get to. And I'm gonna talk about using land wisely in order to cover your ass. Assets. That was very crass. I apologize. Thank you. Roads. So they're assets to a community, but if you don't maintain them, they become liabilities. I'm gonna showcase. I was talking about RSMS system. It's great internally. It's really hard to expose or to provide to the public externally. So what we did is we actually took the analysis from RSMS and replicated into Google Maps. So a little clunky, but what it does, it helps show you, and I'm sure you can tell which roads of mine are in the worst shape versus those that are not. We did this after our road commissioner said, we should probably deal with this road next year. It's a dirt road. It's mud. It is mud. It is not a dirt road. It is just mud. It's bad material. It needs to come out. So the road commissioner says we should do this 2,000-foot stretch of road. We should dig out all the mud and put in a real road base. We're not going to pave it, but we're going to put in a proper dirt road base, rocks and everything. So I mapped out 493 yards, which equates to about 2,000 feet. There's the road when it's dry. Looks fine, but you can see some of the rutting that's happened. And if it gets muddy, it's really bad and hard for cars to get in and out of there. There is a gentleman at the end of the road who does car repairs. So if you have a car that's in rough shape and you're trying to get to the car repair and it's a muddy day, good luck. So our road commissioner recommended a reconstruction of Hassan Avenue, this 2,000-foot stretch. There's my cost, $370,000. So before we had the visuals, this was just based on the road commissioner's recommendation. And there's our new road. Unless you do this for a living, you may not even recognize the difference between the muddy road and this. There's not mud in here. There's fines and proper rocks and all the things that make a road good, even if it is a dirt road. It's set that it could be paved someday. I'm not going to encourage that right now, because when I start to think about, all right, how much is that? $370,000, and who's benefiting from this? It is a dead end road. It used to connect to the Hassan Ave on the other side, but somebody had a fight at some point in the 1940s, we'll say, and that just ended. And there's people at the end of the road who claim that you can't go through there, which is our public easement. I'm not going to get into that. I'm going to focus on this dead end road. And the way I see it is, this is a driveway for 8 residents. There are a total of 11 parcels on this stretch. And I went and pulled the assessed value of all of them just to give an idea of, and I'm trying to think about it from a financial standpoint and the relationship between what that stretch of the community is land use allows for. So I have $2.5 million. So there's my assessed value of $2.5 million. And our mill rate at the time was $13.60. Who's got a higher mill rate in here? All right. That doesn't matter. Just having fun. So if I were to use my value times my mill rate, and I figure out my annual taxes, which is the allowed value, times the mill rate divided by 1,000, I'm going to generate $33,000 on those 11 parcels. The cost of the rehab, if I were to apply all of the tax revenue generated to this cost of the rehab, it's going to take 11.2 years to recoup the costs of that. That road will last more than 11 years, which is good, right? It was 10 parcels, not 11. It's located in our rural district, and its primary frontage, this is the planning side, what our core zoning code says, primary frontage line length is 250 feet. Okay, well, if I were to just map out, like this parcel in particular, could actually be split and to make it 1, 2, 3, 4 lots instead of just one large one. And I think I squeeze another one in here somewhere, maybe not. And I do it on the other side of the road. I come up with, now I go from just 10 parcels. I could have 15 oh, that didn't work out so well. Oh, well. I come up with 15 parcels now. So if I applied my current total, so current, and I averaged those 10 to get 242,000. So I'm using that 242,000 as my base. So now I'm applying it to 15 parcels. So now I'm generating, that's a lot of money. Oh yeah, that's the value, total value of that now subdivided part of the road. And now that value's at the top again, I'm multiplying by my mill rate. Now I'm getting 49,000. And what did I have? 33,000 before. So almost 50,000 now I'm generating. Cost of the rehab. The return on investment comes down to 7.5 years. I'm going to do that again. So I'm not advocating for this. And please, if you know anyone in Newcastle, do not tell them that I'm recommending this, okay? I'm suggesting this, but I'm just theoretically applying a 50-foot frontage. So we went from what the district allows of 250 feet, and I'm narrowing it down to 50 feet with a bit of realignment of the properties. This could stretch as many as 80 parcels. So 40 on either side of that 2,000 feet of road. Simple math. I'm again using that 242,000 as my base times 80. I got $19 million in assessed value here. Taking whoops. Yes, that imagined value is inaccurate. Sorry. That 19.4 should have gone to the top. The 19.4 times the 13.6 gives you $264,000. Cost of rehab, I can pay for this in 1.4 years. That just shows you how density can help pay for your services. However, return on investment in this example assumes all those taxes go to this one project. Is that even an accurate assumption? How many of those new homes now have kids in school? Right? So I have a definition for government. It's in place to create order and allow its citizens to the opportunity to lead happy, healthy, and successful lives, however you define that. My opinion, government has three functions: education, infrastructure, parks and rec, how we get from point A to point B and enjoy all in between. And then that's public safety. In Newcastle, and this is from my 2025 budget, so I'm already in another budget cycle, but if I were to divide our budget into these categories, about 50% of it is for education, 30% of it is for our infrastructure, and 9% of it is for our public safety. That doesn't equal 100. That actually, there's 12.17 of that is for departments that support those efforts. My job, my code enforcement, code is part of public safety. My clerks, the select board initiatives they have might fall into that. What's that? My planner would fall in that. And Michael's here. Thank you, Michael, for being here. I will not forget you. So if you remember those numbers from those revenue from the current density, what would technically be allowed, and then revenue from the greater density that, please do not tell Newcastle I suggested that at any given point. And now if I were to take those percentages that I shared with you about sort of my view of what our local government, actually all governments are sort of broken into, you get these categories. Now I've taken out that small piece that was Hassan Avenue reconstruction, which is almost 5% of the public works budget for that year. And I apply the density revenues to the ROI. In the current density, it's going to take 233 years for that neighborhood to pay for that road, assuming it's the driveway for those 8 or 10 parcels. And the allowed density would take 155 years. And in that greater density, I finally get to a place where it's doable. Building that road should last 30 years. Yes, it will need constant annual maintenance for gravel and grading, but the road itself should stand up for the next 30 years with additional material added occasionally. So I'm never going to get the rural district to be a 50-foot. And what came up in a conversation in Build Maine was, yeah, but if you had 80 houses on there, they're going to want that road paved. Yeah, that's another cost. So I'm not advocating for it. I'm just trying to prove a point that density matters in terms of financing your infrastructure. So I also touch on this one. So downtown, a development project, what's the impact of a downtown project which has access to water and sewer? This is downtown Newcastle. This is downtown Damascotta. My office happens to be in one of the nicest little spots on Main Street. I don't want to be there for long because that has higher and better use than a town office. But recently, this parcel here had 2 houses built on it. I'll talk about it in a second, but that is in our village. Michael's here, great. Village Business District. Thank you. I'm glad you're here. I'm really glad you're here for that. I think what's important is things like the lot width is 20 feet minimum and can't be more than 100 feet. I'd argue that that's not dense enough, and I'll show you why. Governor Mills came to our ribbon cutting for this affordable rental housing complex. I think it's 16 units. It's 2 buildings with 8 one-bedroom apartments in it. Lincoln County is a big funder in helping make that happen, so thank you, Lincoln County. It's a really high value add to our community in terms of generating some workforce housing, affordable housing that is walking distance to a lot of the amenities that people need. They even dug in and put washer and dryers in the building, so their tenants don't have to like get in a car to take their laundry. They can just go downstairs and take care of it. So I'm really impressed with the developer who did this and the work he did to get this to where it is. But now I'm trying to think about it. All right, well, how does this add to the tax base in our community? Is the 8 units, or I'm sorry, the 16 units on this 200-foot stretch of road going to have a value add when it comes to maintaining that road? Side note, this road is Mills Road. It's actually a state aid road. It's the state's responsibility to maintain. But in this hypothetical theory, I'm just showing you what it would take the town to take care of. So let's say we propose to do a Mills Road shim and overlay. We do a lot of that around the state. The DOT does a lot of shim and overlays on a lot of their state aid roads. So I'm just using this example. So this is proposed from where the corner of essentially Main Street is and up to where you would get on Route 1. That's about 1,800 feet. I was quoted $142,500 to do that stretch. Divided by 1,805 feet tells me, we're going to call it a 26 wide road. A foot of that 26 will cost $78.95. So per foot of 2-lane road is $78.95 per foot of 1 lane. So the side that these buildings are on. So I'm only just trying to say that 200 feet right in front of that building is about $40 per foot of 1 lane. And so the cost of the rehab directly in front of this project is about $8,000. So the vacant land, when it was a vacant piece of land, it was going to take, and this doesn't get into the Kevin's 3 functions of government. This just talks about straight. What are the annual taxes? How long is it going to take to pay for that? 5.5 years. With where it was on April 1st, because that's when it was assessed, it was at 52% of completion, and it was assessed at $325,000. It's going to take 1.68 years. When it's fully complete, the estimated value of those 2 buildings is probably about $1.3 million. And that's going to take less than a year to recoup the cost. So again, now I'm applying it back to my percentages, and that overlay represents 1.85% of the budget. I'm showing you that it's still going to take me 42 years to pay for a shim and overlay. Do you know how often we do shim and overlays, or should do shim and overlays? About every 7 years. So at that current density, it still doesn't pay for this project. I would argue that I need another one of those buildings to make this financially viable. So if you're thinking about your downtowns, so this is what I have been thinking a lot about. One, we shouldn't be in the business of accepting any dead-end roads or encouraging the development of private dead-end roads, because at some point, the residents on that dead-end road, of the private one, are going to say, we haven't been setting aside enough of our own money to pay for the maintenance of our road. We're coming to the town and we're demanding that you take it over. I'm sure some of you have been in the room when those questions have come up, and they'll keep coming up. And that pressure might lead to some communities saying, unless they're doing whole life cycle planning, might say, all right, we'll take it over. So I am encouraging, do not take on dead-end roads. Don't encourage the development of them. Reduce or eliminate frontage requirements in the walkable parts of your community. So that's why I talked about the 100 feet maximum, maximum. I think is too much, especially in your downtown. Parking requirements, let the market determine demand. Newcastle doesn't have parking requirements. And height restrictions, density makes a difference. That's a big fight in some communities. A lot of them say 35 feet. Why? That's just a question to everybody here. Why do we have it at 35 feet? Does anybody know? Fire? Okay, that's a legitimate reason. How many of your buildings in your downtowns aren't even at 35 feet? So it's trying to fit the character of the community plus the logistical challenges with what can be done to help offset costs that you don't want to have incurred in your rural parts or new roads created. So recognize the issues in your comprehensive plan and amend zoning to look to address these things. And I think it is important to bring up the fire truck issue. Capital programs are not required under Maine state statute. We talked a little bit that's with Jim. And some charters have them, but they are 5 or 10-year capital plans. So it's developing that 40-year outlook. What are we going to do in 40 years? And every year you're looking at it and you're including some portion of it in your budget process. But what do you plan to do in 40 years? Build up, not out. If height is a concern, fill in and around. So those back lots that at the 35 feet, what's happening in the back lot? Somerville, Massachusetts is a great example of that. One of the densest cities in the entire country. And they don't have skyscrapers. What they've done is they've taken the backyards and turned them into more housing. So we should be doing, if we can't get fire trucks in our communities, we should be doing that. And then focus on and encourage development and density in your town and village centers. Can't stress that enough. These are the areas that will subsidize the rural road maintenance. That goes back to Joe Minicozzi's Urban 3 examples of land value density and where you're generating the most revenue for your town in the densest parts. That's all I got. Oh, I'm going to get back to Jim for one couple more slides quickly. Jim?
Okay. So you might ask, okay, what's going on? How do we solve this problem? I'm not going to tell you that we got it solved over here in Michigan yet. Far from it. But the first step is recognition. About 6 years ago in the previous administration, after a commissioning of a blue ribbon panel across the sectors, this legislature created the Michigan Infrastructure Council by statute and signed into law. You can see here on the right side, infrastructure consistently is identified as the top or a top 1 or 2 issue by citizens of Michigan all of the time. So the Michigan Infrastructure Council was created, and what it's been doing for the past 4 years is raising awareness of life cycle. We have a champions program. There have been 7 or 8 different cohorts that have graduated out of that training program, free to municipalities and any asset owner to come in. The state supports this. It's the first leg of getting understanding and awareness to then start to think about what are the next types of steps going on. Like I said, there is no manual to do this. There is no linkage right now anywhere in the United States and frankly for the world because the disciplines are not connected. The infrastructure community is not well connected to the finance community, is not well connected to the land use planning community. It's not there. We all operate within the same area, but not with the same discipline and connectivity across. And that's the key that needs to happen next after you get awareness. One more slide. Next, Kevin, next slide.
I'm trying, Jim.
Oh, okay.
All right, here we go. Hold on a sec. Oh, I didn't click on it. There we go.
All right, you can click through this till we get to the bottom. So this is the summary. This relationship is clear. Assets support land uses, which in turn generate revenue, which in turn support assets. It's a continuous system, and your municipal fiscal sustainability requires this balance. Now, 2 comments before we get it. Oh, yeah, and then here's the calculation for you to think it through mathematically. 2 items to come up with or to respond to now. I've heard this in questions, which is people usually say to me, how do you know, Jim? Should back up. The first question that people often ask is, what about intergovernmental transfers? Money coming in from the state, money coming in from the federal government. Yep, that's important. Need to include that in your financial projections. But it still doesn't get to the point of being whole life cycle. And more than that, which is, what's the reliability that you have on intergovernmental transfers every year, the same amount or sufficient amount to cover your assets? Probably not. So it's perhaps wise to consider fully funding on your own local revenue and consider state and federal intergovernmental transfers as icing, as extra to help you go along. No one's doing that yet either because no one's thinking back through this thing, thinking through this systemically. Last comment I've heard this for, which is, how, Jim, do you know? Because you're not in our community and you don't know what our numbers are. And that's correct. I don't know that. Neither does Kevin. But here's my response. You don't know either. And so it's in your best interests to actually think and start planning for whole life cycle across all 3 of these sectors. With that, Kevin, I'll give the floor back to you and we can have questions.
Thank you, Jim. And I want to touch on his point, number one, about state and federal revenue. And I'll just show example of Newcastle. 87% of Newcastle's revenue is property taxes. And I guarantee many of you are in the same situation. We don't get a lot in terms of the state aid from municipalities revenue. We've been pushing for it, and the state has been generous to give us more, but it's still not enough to help offset that. So we really do rely heavily on property taxes, which puts us in a position where we're in the business of real estate. We want to see development, but we should see development in our town centers and our communities where we can generate the revenue to help pay for our assets. Okay, so questions? Do you want to hear? Well, so the folks so Jim can hear you too.
So I thank you both for your presentation. Okay. Thank you. My name is Joan Walton. I'm the director of the state's Municipal Planning Assistance Program. I don't disagree with your presentation. The circle's not been completed, and it's really important. I just want to call attention to one section of state law where we do require municipalities do capital investment planning. It's part of the growth management law. And I'm just going to read an excerpt from it so I don't misquote it. Comprehensive plan must include an implementation strategy and a timetable. They must guide the subsequent adoption of policies, programs, and land use ordinances, including a capital investment plan for the replacement and expansion of public facilities and services required to meet projected growth and development. So
that is correct.
We don't have the mechanism to require that municipalities actually take that capital investment plan and turn it into a capital improvement program, use it, maintain it. If I had the staff, if we had the funding, we could give it to you and we could ensure that that happens. We do fall short on that, but the basis is there in the growth management law. So I just wanted to
thank you for that.
Provide that it's a nuance, but it is in there. It's part of it. If you want your comprehensive plan to be found to be consistent by the state, which is what my office does, then you need to have the capital investment plan, which means you've gone through the inventory process. You've looked at where you want to go, where you want development to occur, and start to think about and lay out what the costs will be over the 5-year, 10-year CIP planning horizon.
Yeah. Can I comment on that?
Yeah, please do.
All right. That's a great statement. Appreciate that. That sounds similar to how we practice in my state, and where the states have it on statute, they usually do that. My recommendation is that language needs to be beefed up significantly, because what that leads to is what the standard that happens in my state and other states, which is what's a capital investment plan? Okay, it's a plan that shows capital investments, and there is no qualifiers on that. Over a period of time, but where's replacement costs? Where's econometric modeling? Where's it tied in terms of being level on fiscal balance? Okay, it's not there. That's not a blaming statement as much as that's the type of language that should really be beefed up to say municipalities should have level balance on municipal services or in capital expenditures over life cycle. If that was a part of your statute, that'd be a whole different ballgame.
Yep. And talking about the whole life cycle. All 40 years, all 5 years for your
continuous life cycle.
Yes, continuous. Thank you, Jim. I'm still learning from him. So another question here.
So you said you're starting to begin to get to that point. What are your next steps in your town? And then are you actually like hiring any outfits to kind of get this data together, or is there a certain platform that you're looking at implementing?
Sure. No, I'm not looking to use any other software than the free software that the state gave me for our roads. Newcastle is fortunate. I'm not responsible for sewer or water. We have a quasi-municipal government to deal with those. However, I would love to work with them. So they're doing this too, and that'll be in the future. Right now, I'm focused on town roads and town facilities, which I can do all in-house. Another shout out to Lincoln County. They gave me a grant to do I hired someone last year to actually go and inventory all of our roads. Can you put that on mute for me, please? Thank you. I think that's what the problem is. Now I've lost my train of thought because I just echoed and heard myself over and over and over again. The town, yes, that's right. The county has an ask grant, ASK. I did not say ass out loud again. Oh crap. Oh man. See me after class. Thank you. Assistance for specific know-how. So I hired someone to help us inventory our roads, which I gave you a quick visual of our Google map showing what needed to be done. So once we've done that, then I can go through and actually work with somebody to price those out, and I can map it out on a long-term 40-year scale of how and when we're going to take care of these. So it's somebody who likes spreadsheets. Mike was talking about how he really loves math. I might hire him to come help me map it all out on a spreadsheet, or his daughter, who's a mathematician. So yeah, great. But yeah, I'm trying to find in-house work to do it. Follow up.
Besides just the roads though, like what about your recreational facilities and all the other buildings?
Yep,
and
that's all facilities work. I serve as the facilities manager for our buildings, and I have already done sort of a long-term plan. Some of them require like it's called the Harriet Bird Clubhouse. It's a community room that can be rented out in Newcastle. It's in need of repair. And that is a community conversation about the cost to replace it or the cost to repair it. And are we willing to carry that on? So there's a lot of, it's not just I can put numbers on a piece of paper and get everybody's support. I actually have to go to the community and invite them to help strategize. And that's probably where I'll find some facilitators to assist us in those larger conversations about strategy. And it should be in your comprehensive plan, ideally. That's the first place to check. Is it already been talked about in your comprehensive plan? And then it's actually putting the numbers on paper. Other question in the back there.
Sea level, right? You know, for those of us.
Yeah.
In St. George right now, we have, we're looking at potential options in Port Clyde for closing roads, raising roads. We got 125 miles of coastline. You know, where's this money going to come from? I have no idea.
It's not. So this is that conversation, a real conversation about some retreat. Sadly, the resiliency is we can't afford to do all of these things. We have to be strategic about what it is. And that's another community conversation. So, yeah, there's not enough money to do it all. There's a question over here.
Not a question, it's a comment.
The more you own, the more it owns you. When you add buildings, you add infrastructure, you have to maintain it. And I'll give you an example of how this has turned into a disaster. A couple of years ago, the federal government via OSHA came out and said that all fire departments in the United States of America have to have new turnouts. You're going to throw them away after 10 years, regardless of what condition they are. A new set of turnouts will cost $12,000. They came out and said you can't have a fire truck older than 20 years old. In Waldo County, I believe there's one fire truck, one that's less than 20 years old. In the town of Montville, we have 4, and the youngest one is 2004. The rest of them are 86 and 1991. Our municipal budget for the fire department is $82,000. In order to implement this new proposed mandate, and assuming we join 3 towns together, those 3 towns would have cost probably $1.5 million in operating expenses, fuel, maintenance, et cetera, et cetera. That does not include the net present value of union mandated retirement benefits. They came out and they said, this is this great idea. It's put together by somebody in suburbia or in an urban environment where they've got fire hydrants every 500 feet. The nearest fire department to the town of Montville is in Belfast, 16 miles away. So you've got this this mandated program put out by government that has absolutely no clue how to work in a rural environment. I see the number of people here. You're from Portland, you're from Bath, Brunswick, Brewer, Bangor. This does not apply to 65% of the state, with towns, for example, Montville has 1,100 people in it. Government is not the solution in many cases. Government is the problem. And this is being rammed down our throats. We've got taxpayers that are sitting there. We like the way Montville is. We don't want to turn into suburbia. We don't want to be like Connecticut or Massachusetts. I bought 63 acres across the road from me because I don't want some piece of garbage put across the road from me. You're going to be driving people out of the state if you keep burdening them with more and more regulations.
Next one, Mike.
I just want to follow up on that and say I think that's kind of the other side of the coin, and maybe the point is if you don't have the land value, you can't support the services. So if you don't want any services, then you don't need to have land value, and that's fine. And I'm just wondering if maybe at this point we're kind of already out over our skis with, you know, these overbuilt rural roads, or, you know, sending services to places that don't have that we can't afford to send it to. And I'm not saying that, you know, life safety is obviously an important thing. We want to, you know, it's probably worth subsidizing, but it's like, I don't know if we should be doubling down on infrastructure that isn't justified through land use, you know, overextending your roads, your sewers, whatever, and then only requiring suburban level of development. I think like my thinking on this is like, those are the two poles here, is like urban areas have the land value and the infrastructure, rural areas don't have the infrastructure. And that's fine. They can function that way. They always have. But you can't the trouble with suburbia is it tries to have the services without the land value.
Can I add a couple points to that?
Please.
To the last two speakers, I think they were excellent points made. Two other observations. Going back to the Detroit bankruptcy, one of the minor, not really described or discussed elements of the bankruptcy was the decision of the city to actually shut down infrastructure in areas where there was low density, low occupation. Now, were not a lot of those areas, but there were some of those areas where there just was not a lot of people living anymore. And so the decision was made to actually revert those to fallow or even natural systems, like mostly near where there are existing river water courses, where most of this problematic buildings were, because nature was telling them don't build here anyways. Okay, so that's a variation of what that gentleman just said, which is understand where you are. And if you don't want to pay the taxes, then don't have the infrastructure, or pare back your infrastructure. Now that's a political decision to make, but that's the net. That's the net that needs to be understood.
Do you want to touch on? Was it?
Yeah, and I'm just going to stay a bit of distance so the speaker hopefully doesn't give us feedback again. Jen Curtis on Zoom said, great topic of material. Given the geography of the MCOG region, I would throw on the top of the pile of infrastructure loads the added cost of providing busing, emergency services, etc. on rural peninsulas, nature's cul-de-sacs. Fair point. And then I'll go. Every road is a dead end. There you go.
I think to piggyback on both of these, a lot of the challenges, I think for Maine is we're trying to undo a lot of past planning practices where we've allowed somebody to buy 200 acres and they put their house at the end of the property and then they're subdividing it. And so you have talking about a road that's been accepted as a town road and now there's 3 or 4 homes on it and things are changing. And so really, how do we look at this as two parts about things we've already done that we try to maintain and keep the character of our community, but then the future planning to not let it happen again. So we're doing it, whether it's on a return on investment talking about regionalization or other parts and pieces. We have a road that was designed for wagon trail that's now have 50 homes on it, and we're struggling to maintain it and keep it up. And there are $1 million homes popping up left and right. And so the level of service expectation is changing for communities of 2,000-3,000 people. So how do you balance it?
That's part of it, is is having this conversation. It's like we all need to be aware of the problem, right? So, and accepting, like we this is where we are, and doing the analysis to determine how much it's costing us, and then it's making informed decisions about where you may retreat, or may need to retreat in order to stay solvent. And it's investing in those, if you have them, your community centers, your village centers. I mean, even if it's a four-corner, it's a stop sign, a four-way stop, and it has a little old general store and a gas station next door, that's your village center. Maybe some other people could reside there. You could build a few more houses closer together and create more of a village center. That will still help offset the tax rate for the rest of that community, even if it is small. But it's recognizing where our infrastructure is, where our very most costly infrastructure is based on assessed value, and then thinking strategically about how that is either something that is going to continue to be subsidized by the rest of the community, or you're going to create more density there to make it financially viable. So that's where I think about it. It's two approaches. And yes, and it's not allowing, it's changing your zone, changing your core zoning code to include these financial analysis to say, if we build this neighborhood, this new neighborhood, this cul-de-sac, will the return on that investment actually be beneficial for our community or costly to our community?
Yeah, if I can follow up, Kevin.
Yeah.
Great points. He's right on, which is not every land use has to actually have its allocated revenue to generate for its infrastructure costs. You can have some differentiation, but over your entire municipality, you need to be level funded. You need to be level balanced. So you have that offset, and Kevin described it well. Your corridors, your centers, those should be perhaps where you have the highest value density, or you promote value density there, so that you can offset or build revenue in time to make it to cover those costs. Back in June, we had a question that came up, which I'll repeat here now, which is, what can a municipality do today? Because this is all new to you. And what I said back then, I'll say here now. If you amended your site plan review ordinances to require that any new development demonstrate to you that the taxes generated from the project that they're proposing, residential, commercial, mix, whatever it's going to be, is going to pay for its apportioned infrastructure costs over over life cycle. You determine what that is, 30, 35, 40 years, whatever it is, and that be a part of the decision to approve or not approve. Start that tomorrow. That will start to get you on fiscal balance, because the development community hasn't really thought about that. Let's think about this from a developer standpoint. Kevin and Jim at Development LLC, we're going to go build a road, and we want to sell 20 lots off that road. We are going to sell the capitalized cost of that infrastructure when we sell those lots or those homes on those lots. That's how that infrastructure gets paid for by us up front. But that only happens one time, when we sell those lots for development. There's never going to be an infusion of capital like that ever again, unless you special assess, something like that. So therein lies where the development community doesn't see, or doesn't want to see, depending on how it chose, that the fiscal misbalance of what their development's going to be, because they're not required to be held accountable when they submit the project for your review. So hold them accountable in site plan review.
Okay, next question.
Sorry, but maybe another comment or just discussion formulator here. But so hi, I'm Greg LeClaire from Inland Fisheries and Wildlife, beginning with Habitat. One thing I like to try to get towns thinking about as far as infrastructure, a message that I'm trying to get in more ears, so hopefully this is interesting, but roads in the wrong place cost you even more money because of wildlife vehicle collisions. So I don't know if anybody here is aware of how much we're spending as a state, but $300 million a year on deer and moose collisions primarily. So, talking about where we're putting these roads and who's using them and when, I think it's an important thing to consider. So I'm happy to talk about more wildlife and road things later if anyone's interested.
Well, this is also talking about the subsidizing the things we care about, our farmlands, our forests, our wetlands. Those are the things we want to protect as a community. Well, don't want to see those developed. So if we can prove out that the finances don't work, and it's in your site plan process or your planning board process, that won't get developed. You won't see that new road added in those areas where we as a community may say we don't want them. So I'll leave it at that, but that's a good point.
Next question.
Sure. Just getting back to something you said about in the corner of, I think in Newcastle, that four corner, you said you could build, it sounds like, I guess where I'm going is municipalities have done a significant amount to ramp up density allowances. We're not in the business of developing, right? Municipalities generally don't develop. We don't have land. We're not housing authorities. We facilitated a lot, but the development's not coming. So I think the economics of this is really on the developer side, not really on the municipality side, because we've done that. And thinking about also density, we also have to think about, especially, I work for the town of Camden. We have significant stormwater problems, and our stormwater infrastructure has been there for 100 years in the ground with, Orangeburg pipe and everything else. When we allow more development, that stormwater infrastructure is more impacted. And so we're actually looking at restricting, while the state's saying you've got to allow, don't have lot coverages. We feel like we need to have lot coverages and almost maximum impervious surfaces so that we don't inundate our stormwater infrastructure enough. And I think that's the challenge, significant challenge municipalities are facing, is that we don't have the resources to facilitate all the housing development that the state says we need. And I think just whole nother topic about this 80,000 dwelling units we need. I think we should start thinking about it more in bedrooms rather than necessarily dwelling units, because to me, it seemed the issue that we have is bedrooms. We have a lot of homes, with 4 bedrooms that have 1 or 2 people in them. And then it's just the economics of the interest rates and everything else just prevents a lot of these things from continuing. So just a couple of points and thoughts.
And I appreciate that, because Newcastle is in the process of recognizing that it's challenging to find developers to do projects for us. So Newcastle has actually acquired a piece of property in our downtown. It's actually just behind those 2 units that I was talking about, where we are going to be the developers.
Right.
We're going to see it all the way to the finish line.
Sure.
And yes, stormwater is a big component of that. We don't have a lot of stormwater infrastructure in our downtown now, but it's going to have to come as part of that. And we're incorporating understanding those costs as part of this project. And we won't we're going to make sure that the project is dense enough to help offset the cost of that new infrastructure that's going to have to go in to address stormwater.
Yeah. And just another thought on the stormwater piece. Anytime, and I think engineers overly engineer projects often and require catch basins and this, that, and the other, rather than allowing sheet flow of water sometimes. I think people forget about the costs of replacing those concrete cement catch basins that are very, very expensive to install. And due to the salt that we have, those have a very limited lifespan.
And that's where that continuous life
Right.
cycle,
Right.
whole life cycle, understanding that just because you pay to put it in doesn't mean it's going to need to be maintained or repaired or replaced at some future date. So that's where that 40-year life cycle planning is crucial to this.
Yep. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yep. Hey, I've exhausted questions here, it looks like. Any others?
Can I add a comment to what that last response, Kevin?
Yeah.
Okay. Appreciate that comment. And I understand you guys have a lot of stuff on your plate at municipal level. I think it's imperative that you begin to think and act as if you're a developer, because the cavalry's not coming. You are the cavalry. That sounds like a load. It sounds like a stress. That's the reality. How do you do that? You have a number of economic development incentive tools in your state to assist in development. The standard approach of municipalities is that those incentives are for the developers when they come knocking on your door, that they can submit, make requests, and you can review and approve those. But that's not what the statutes say. You can also use them yourselves to proceed thinking and acting like a developer and reach out and harness the private market to execute the plans and the projects that you want to see happen that meet your goals and objectives or address your stormwater needs or requirements or anything else that you want. Like Kevin was saying, what it requires, step one, is a mind shift. Instead of being regulators and facilitators, you're going to actually be proactive, development focused entities working with your market sector players.
I appreciate that. Thank you for that comment. Stormwater, I think it's also important to realize and remember the MS4 communities. We don't have a lot of them in this region, but soon I think Rockland's probably going to get rolled into an MS4, Belfast, Camden likely, and that costs significant amounts of funds for the municipality coming. So.
Watch me stand up here and oh, because I'm no wire.
Yeah. So I know a lot of our communities have, sort of their main roads, their main local roads, and they're not really interested in adopting additional roads. So, a lot of, I think, new development is happening on private roads with not a lot of incentive for the rest of the town to adopt those. I know they can be proposed for adoption, but doesn't that development on those private roads help offset the cost of the rest of the infrastructure for the town? Is that a valuable asset?
So you're saying a private road that's not accepted by the town, there's now development on it. Well, when all those cars come off of that private road, what do they get onto? So you're adding more vehicle traffic onto a town road or even a state aid road. And we also talk about climate change, and we talk about Maine won't wait, and 49% of our greenhouse gas emissions come from transportation. So if we're allowing these developments to happen, we're actually encouraging more of that carbon footprint rather than focusing in the downtown where you can walk, bike to the things you need. So yes, maybe those houses will help offset some of the other infrastructure needs, but you're putting more strain on the infrastructure that they're now going to need to use to get to their homes.
Yeah, Kevin, I'd like to respond to that too. And I'm going to go. I'm going to harken back to one of the early slides in the presentation. Don't show it, but really early slides. Right now. Imagine your town is in deficit. You know that, okay? In other words, you've got infrastructure needs. You don't have enough revenue. So your first thought is, we want those 12 homes because they're going to bring in new revenue. Great. On the short term, they will. All right. What's the long term? The long term is that those homes are built in too low a density to pay for that road, which is a private road anyways. So in X years, they probably are going to come back to you that want the town to accept that road, which is going to be additional cost in addition to the fact that your deficit you have now. So what I'm pointing out, don't mean to be critical here, is that actually explains the Ponzi slide that I showed early in the presentation. Short-term revenue without sufficient coverage of long-term return is going to widen your deficits in the long run.
All right, and then we have another question over here.
Yeah, I just want to say one thing real quick. I want to pick up on your comment about, climate change and emissions, right? And this relates into roads. Maine has a ton of roads, a lot of pavement. The reality is, even if we decarbonized and electrified our entire auto fleet, what is the main source of material that goes into roads? It's bitumen, asphalt, which has to be refined from a barrel of oil. So even if we were no longer refining oil for gasoline for our cars, we still need to refine that barrel of oil to pave our roads, which is another reason why we should be looking at densifying our downtowns and not encouraging sprawl and development. And at a certain point in the future, the cost of that barrel of oil is going to become too expensive to extract. We're not going to have the oil to pave our roads. And so we have to be prepared for a Maine where we have a lot of rural unpaved roads again and dense walkable downtowns.
Well said. Thank you, David.
All right, Joan?
I'm just wondering if there's a role for impact fees to help offset or mitigate the impacts of the long-term life cycle costs.
Impact fees in a downtown are going to actually prohibit development from happening. Impact fees, if you can discourage development where you don't want to see it happen, that might work. It's a good question. I haven't really thought about it from a disincentivizing the development to happen. But
I can respond to that, Kevin, because I'm working with folks in Canada, in Ontario, and they have the impact fees in Canada are called development charges. And there's a big debate going on right now, largely because they're too high, for housing, and they were ahead of Canada's in the housing crisis as well. But the underlying issue, which is getting a little bit of publicity right now, is this. Impact fees are designed on the growth pays for growth. Okay, so scenario. But the way that they're levied is here's the charge based upon the infrastructure necessary to build and operate and maintain it. So by default, impact fees do not include replacement costs. But even if it did, you're paying the impact fee once. On the second life cycle, there is no more impact fee. So there's a flaw in the philosophy of impact fees, just like there's a flaw in the philosophy of development charges in Canada, and they're just starting to get to that realization now. So while it's a great idea, it's flawed, and the better structure is to go to whole life cycle infrastructure management, time to finance, time to land use, so that you get the right land use intensity density to actually pay for your services in the long run.
Thank you, Jim.
All right, and over here.
Again, small community, working on getting ready to start comp plan again, but re-looking at our commercial zones. What about local sales tax? Having the state pick up that conversation again, because you try to offset some of your residential tax base with commercial tax base, which brings more people in, but we don't benefit from it. When I was in Scarborough driving a couple $100,000 cars to beaches, we received nothing on the backside, and it came back from fee structure and property taxes. So when we try to look at our commercial development, how do we offset some of that?
Service Center Coalition and service center communities struggle with this every year and make this argument with legislators every year, but it just falls on deaf ears, at least currently. In the last few years, there's been the conversation's gotten a little further than it has in the past, but I still think we're going to struggle with that. What it also does is when there is a local option sales tax, and I used to work in New York years ago. There was local option sales tax, but what it is, it pitted one community who was able to bring business in versus another, and you had this constant battle of who could provide the most incentives to get that business to come to town. Your communities lose in that scenario. So from a structure standpoint of revenue generated from sales tax that goes to the state that's redistributed, I think the issue is the redistribution formula needs to change, not necessarily additional or some portion of the current taxes going directly to the town where it was generated. So I think there's something there that needs to change because, as I mentioned before, 87% of what our tax revenue or our revenue comes from is from property taxes. Very small sliver of that is the municipal revenue sharing from the state for sales tax. So there is something that has to change. I'm just not sure how much it's going to ultimately benefit us without hurting us when we start competing from one town to the other. All right.
Any other
We're just
questions?
between lunch. So
any other questions? So we have
you don't
one
want
here.
All right.
No?
It's going to take that down.
Oh, yep. I got to walk around first. Sure.
Because I've got to run out pretty soon here. Hi, everybody. I'm Gabe Govin. I'm the programs manager at Maine Redevelopment Land Bank Authority. We are the state's first statewide land bank created by state statute a couple of years ago. Jim has been a huge help to us. Hi, Jim. We officially launched about a year ago in East Millinocket with a project there. Just wanted to introduce myself to you all today. The folks at MCOG can easily put you in touch with me. And there's a lot of different topics that we can talk about of the tools in our toolbox at the land bank. But just number one, wanted to communicate that we currently have lightning stabilization grants available. These are for municipally owned properties that, but for a 25K influx from us, that property is going to become unrecoverable and just contribute to life safety or environmental issues in your community. The quick case model I can provide on this is our first instance of a stabilization grant was in Van Buren, where it was a downtown mixed-use building that was vacant and falling down, needed a roof to make it through the winter. We provided that funding. New roof went on. Now it is a gallery space on the main floor with artist and resident space up above. So that's the kind of nice little recovery story that we want to see out of these very agile grants. There's no formal procedure right now. It's a pilot program. So it's really just reach out and let's talk about the projects you've got in your community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gabe. And we actually just have a few comments on Zoom. First is from Jen. Impact fees and later life cycle costs. If the developers pay the impact fees to develop the infrastructure and then the users would pay for the services, shouldn't the service fees cover later life cycle improvements? It seems like if they were enough users per unit of infrastructure, it should function that way, where they function like utilities. Yeah, Jen likes to argue with herself sometimes. I don't know if there are any comments on that. Yeah, lunch. Get to lunch.
I provided a comment to that. I saw that question on the chat, and I provided a response to the chat. That's going to work if you have enterprise infrastructure, roads, water, sewer. I don't know what the main structure is, but those are enterprise infrastructures. In other words, you pay a fee. You pay for your water. You pay for I think you pay for your sewer. I think you pay for your storm charge. I don't know if you do or not, but so when you're paying a user fee on an enterprise infrastructure, then that could work for a development charge or a impact fee. Everything else, you're not paying a user fee. That's municipal wide. It's paid through your taxes. So that dilemma I mentioned comes to play. The developer pays it once and or gets the users, the purchase, they capitalize once, and then you're stuck unless you're at sufficient value density to cover the cost across the life cycle.
So if there are no other questions or comments, I'll hand this off to Matt.
Sounds good. So thank you very much, Kevin and Jim.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks for your time. Have a great day.
For everybody in the community, you have to know that my planners and I talk about this all the time. All the time. And it's a wrestling act. It really is, because we have communities of all different sizes in our region, and there's no right sizing. You know, I think our general principle is that we come out and we talk to you and we talk about good planning principles and how to engage those planning principles for your size. But this notion of planning for the future and capital needs and life cycle, no matter what size community you are, you have to think about it. And you have to think about it at some level. And it's important in your comprehensive planning process that you make that decision. You think about it, you identify it, you say, this is our path.
May I add one more comment?
Sure.
Okay, sorry, that's a great one. And I want to follow up by saying this. This is not just an issue for you as local units of government. This is the state's got to get in the middle on this. And here's why. Let's imagine a 50-year scenario where 1, 2, 5, 7, 12, 25 units of government have to declare bank insolvency because they don't have the money to pay for it anymore. That's a problem for those 25 local units of government, but it's also a problem for the state of Maine because your municipalities are creatures of the state. So this is why it's a critical problem for both local and state government. And I'm hopeful that folks in the legislature, I've talked to a few of them, are interested to try to get on this, start to find build a platform so you can find solutions.
Jim, you have one in you now have one in Michigan where they are looking at this, right?
Well, our infrastructure council, this is the next phase of our work with the state infrastructure council. Yes.
Yeah. So that's something that could be considered for implementation here.
I'm thinking lunch, which isn't here yet. So what I'm suggesting is that we break here, mingle around a little bit, meet your friends. Thank you. But I think the important thing is lunch will be here in a little bit. This lunch hour is meant to talk about these ideas and is meant to set up a discussion later on this afternoon. The conversation will start with Charlotte, where she'll be throwing you a bunch of new data and update of data and trends and ways we're seeing this region change and stay the same in some cases, but change and modify. We want to take all these ideas that you've heard this morning and take them to your afternoon sessions in your breakouts and pick the topics. Alexis will go through with you with that in the afternoon. But this was a great, I thank both speakers, this was a great setup to the conflicts as you as communities, no matter what size you are, whether you're as small as Montville, Doug, or you're dealing with Jeremy's issues in Camden. This thinking and this approach to planning your way through an issue and beginning to really think about it in a life cycle long-term solution is really important. So take that, we'll break now, and we'll get back together. Thank you all.